poems, so I'm going to read another dance poem tonight. This one is called Chicago. My friend Judith Makita, who is a dancer and a choreographer, just had a piece in the Miami University Dance Theater concert a few weeks ago. Actually started her dance career in Chicago, and the poem is called Chicago. She went back to visit the people that she had been involved with for about 10 years back there, sent me a postcard, and I took the first paragraph of her postcard and turned it into the first stanza of a poem. The poem is in the sestina form. For those of you who aren't poets, I'll briefly explain what that involves. It's a poem that consists of six-line stanzas and a 3-line stanza at the end. And the trick is that the final words of the 6 lines in the first stanza then become the final words in different order of the lines of all the following stanzas. And actually, I'll go ahead and tell you what the words are. Sometimes this is kind of a cheat, but in this poem the words are returned, class, rehearsals, back, which in the first stanza and 1 or 2 other stanzas appear as the word feedback, and city and body. So the first stanza is directly from Judith's postcard, and the rest is kind of my improvisation on that, or my variations. Chicago. With dance bag and L tokens, I returned. 38 dancers were in advanced technique class. I met with Shirley, Bob, and Jan, watched rehearsals, offered them feedback. Summer dancing in the city feels and smells like home on my body. I felt I needed to renew my body, which is more than half the reason I returned to this place that Carl Sandburg called City of the Big Shoulders. In advanced technique class, I fed my own shoulders and my own back. And then with Shirley, Bob, and Jan, I watched rehearsals. Are all these warm reunions just rehearsals for some final going back into my own body? Are all our bright experiences some sort of feedback to keep us returning, as I have returned, to this rehearsal hall, advanced technique class, the parks, museum, the feels and smells of the city? Summer dancing in the city is more than just reunions and rehearsals, more than just the dancers in advanced technique class. Just as the Mongolian barbecue on Clark Street fed my body, I've been fed by creativity, friendship, given and returned, which is why I needed so much to come back. And so, with L tokens in pocket and dance bag on my back, I did come back to a summer of dancing in the city, where in my dreams before this I've returned, and between reunions and rehearsals, I felt a kind of feedback in my body, like attending some celestial advanced technique class. The 38 dancers in advanced technique class at home would have been only 5 standing back to back. Here, everything seems to have more body. This really is the Big Shoulder City, where, through all the classes and rehearsals, I've leaped and spun, I've turned and returned. I know now my return was not like just some class reunion or routine rehearsal with feedback. I know that in this city, I've come home to my body. I perhaps should have explained before I started, Shirley, Bob, and Jan are 3 Chicago choreographers with whom she had worked. Shirley Mordine, Bob Eisen, and Jan Urquhart. And actually, Bob Eisen is the only one that I've met. This poem is called Gertrude. Tom read his poem for Wallace Stevens. This is my poem for Gertrude. I think it'll become abundantly clear what Gertrude I'm talking about. Is Gertrude an interesting idea? Is the idea of Gertrude an interesting idea? Gertrude is an idea and an interesting idea, and Gertrude is an interesting idea. Is Gertrude interesting? Is Gertrude an idea, the interesting idea of Gertrude? Interesting and an interesting idea. The idea of Gertrude is an interesting idea and is interesting and is an idea. The interesting idea of Gertrude is interesting. The interesting idea of Gertrude is not interesting as the idea of Gertrude is an interesting idea and Gertrude. Gertrude and the idea of Gertrude are all an idea of Gertrude, which is interesting, and Gertrude is an interesting idea. We will not speak to Gertrude. We will not throw stones to Gertrude. We will not sing to Gertrude. We will not wink to Gertrude. We will not swim or slouch or shoulder to Gertrude. We will not undress to Gertrude. We will not sort or rumple to Gertrude. We will not whisper to Gertrude, nor indeed dance to Gertrude, nor will we include Gertrude in our picnic. The ocean beats slowly against the door. We will not snooze to Gertrude, for instance, or sled to Gertrude, or squeak to Gertrude. We will not whistle to Gertrude. We will not spill or sprinkle to Gertrude. We will not grope to Gertrude. We will not slide to Gertrude. What do you think of Gertrude and Alice? What do you think of the idea of Gertrude and Alice? Are Gertrude and Alice an interesting idea? Are Gertrude and Alice an idea? Are Gertrude and Alice interesting and an interesting Gertrude idea? Do you think Gertrude, do you think Gertrude is Alice and Gertrude? Do you think that Gertrude and Alice, for instance, are an interesting idea, for instance? We will not hear to Gertrude, we will not listen to Gertrude, we will not French to Gertrude or German to Gertrude. Even during the war, which is not an interesting idea, we will not hide to Gertrude, we will not to Gertrude, not now. For instance, we will not throw to Gertrude, we will not bow to Gertrude, for instance. Gertrude, we will not pray to Gertrude, for instance. For instance, we will not sleep to Gertrude, we will not shovel to Gertrude, we will not snow to Gertrude, we will not shine to Gertrude, for instance. For instance, we will not explain to Gertrude, and if not, said Gertrude to Gertrude, said Gertrude. Between Gertrude and Alice, there comes Gertrude and Alice and Gertrude. What do you think of Gertrude and Alice, for instance? What do you think, for instance, of Alice and Gertrude? For instance, what do you think of Gertrude and Alice, for instance? And thank you to Miss Stein.